New Faces, New Friends by Arleta Richardson. Chapter 1. Sarah Jane's News. The little town of North Branch, situated on the banks of the Chippewa River, was not as sleepy as it might appear to the casual observer. With nearly 300 inhabitants in the early summer of 1895, North Branch was prospering in the lumber industry.
"Can you believe there are over 100 men employed at the mills and in the woods?"
I asked my best friend, Sarah Jane Charles.
"I read that in last week's paper," she said. "Hasn't anything happened in town since then?"
"This is last week's paper,"
I informed her.
"I wanted to be sure that I hadn't missed anything before I wrapped the trash in it."
"If it's written, you haven't missed it. You're the only person I know who reads the small print on the Watkins liniment bottle."
"Remember when I made a birthday cake for Ma and used liniment instead of vanilla to flavor it? A little extra reading would have been a good idea that time."
Sarah Jane laughed.
"Don't start, Mabel. If we remember all the half-witted things we've done in our lives, we wouldn't dare get up in the morning."
"True,"
I nodded.
"And we don't seem to improve much with age. Are you watching those tomatoes on the stove?"
Sarah Jane jumped up and moved the pan just before it bubbled over the top.
"These are going to taste good next winter," she remarked, "but I sure hate to waste a beautiful Saturday like this on canning."
"School will be out in a couple of weeks,"
I reminded her.
"We'll have lots of beautiful days this summer."
I sat down at the kitchen table.
"I wonder how it will feel to be staying home when school starts in September,"
I said.
"You'll be too busy to wonder," Sarah Jane assured me. "A new baby will take every minute of your time. Has Mr. Williams found another teacher yet?"
"Not that I know of,"
I replied. My father-in-law was a school board president, and I was sure that we would hear of any possibilities for the school that I had taught for 3 years.
"There will be more families coming in this summer," Sarah Jane said. "Thomas has finished platting the north section behind the mill, and most of the lots have been spoken for. That means more children in school."
"It's also going to mean a new schoolhouse if there are too many more,"
I commented.
"Only Jay Stacy and Joel Gage are ready for high school."
Sarah Jane left for home, and I continued to think about the children I had taught and watched grow since I had come to North Branch 3 years ago. They were all dear to me, even Julianne Lawton, who had been a trial I'd have gladly foregone.
"She strengthens your character," Sarah Jane often told me.
"I suppose she does,"
I replied.
"But I'd hate to think I'd been put on this earth as nothing but a character builder."
"How do you know you weren't?" she grinned. "You've done wonders for mine."
When Len came home for supper, he had news of a church in a neighboring community. "Hudson Curtis was in to see me today," he said. "He tells me that his Greenwood church is prospering greatly since they've rebuilt."
"They'd better be. They have a debt that will follow them into the next century."
"That's only 5 years away," Len reminded me. "But you're right. It won't be retired in a hurry. Hudson has a plan, though." I glanced at Len. He didn't sound too pleased.
"He's going to take up an offering at our church?"
I guessed.
"Not that simple. He thinks that the new farms going in north of us are his territory and that the people should be his parishioners."
"Since when does the church stake out a territory?"
I asked.
"Aren't folks allowed to worship where they please?"
"By all means, and ministers are allowed to recruit new members. I just wish he hadn't left the impression that I am to limit my recruiting to the south side of the river."
I thought about this as I put our supper on the table. Goodness knows there were enough people in the south side to fill our church several times if they all attended, but it hardly seemed fair to set boundaries for the Lord's work. I told him that I would continue to call on newcomers just as I always have. He is free to do likewise. He seems quite confident that his big church will bring them in.
"Do you suppose it's time to think about rebuilding here?"
I ventured. Len shook his head. "A building isn't what brings people to God. It's a caring and compassionate spirit and getting the message to them where they are. That's how I intend to work until the Lord shows me differently." The subject was closed, and we talked about other things as we ate. I knew, however, that Len had not dismissed the matter from his mind. 2 weeks passed swiftly, and the end-of-year school picnic was a huge success.
Mrs. Williams, us boys will take care of directing the games,
Jay Stacy offered.
We can have races and kickball and a marbles competition. He grinned. Since I'm the only one who dropped any marbles, do I get 'em all back?
Jay was referring to my rule regarding marbles in the classroom. Any that dropped on the floor during school became my property until the end of the year.
Absolutely,
I said.
with interest. I believe I have some more in there that I've collected over the years. They're all yours.
Parents came laden with food for the day. For the first time anyone could recall, Agnes Lawton was there with her girls.
Why, she looks like a young woman,
I said to Ma Williams.
Can you believe what it has done for her to have Elizabeth back home and her place fixed up so it's livable?
She has a new life, Ma Williams agreed. The Lord has brought no end of good things out of that unfortunate business. The unfortunate business to which she referred was the embezzlement of funds by the manager of the shingle mill, Roland Brewer, and Agnes Lawton's husband, Cy. The whole thing resulted in a fire that destroyed nearly half the town and caused the death of Cy Lawton. The good things the Lord brought out of it were not confined to Agnes and her family. I had benefited myself. The oldest Lawton girl, Elizabeth, had resented my coming to North Branch when she discovered that Len was becoming interested in me rather than in her. She did all she could to make my life miserable, and for 3 years I had harbored resentment toward Elizabeth. As usual, it was Sarah Jane who had pointed out how foolish my behavior was.
How are you going to get even with her? She asked.
Get even? You know I wouldn't do that.
You might as well. Holding a grudge against Elizabeth is eating on you, not her.
I knew Sarah Jane was right, and I began to pray seriously about the matter. With the Lord's help, I was able to forgive Elizabeth and offer her my friendship. Now she was working in the mill office for Jerome Grayson, the owner, and a good friend of ours. My mind was brought back to the picnic by the appearance of the Abbott twins, Joanna and Rosanna. Each had a twin of the Abbotts' second set in tow. The little boys were the very picture of their elder sisters.
At least I'm not going to have to tell these two apart in 3 years, I said. Which is which? No use to ask them,
Rosanna informed me.
They both answer if you say either name. This one is Paul. And this one is Peter.
Joanna said,
Are you really not coming back next year? What will we do if we don't like the new teacher? We've never had anyone but you. I'm sure you'll like your new teacher,
I told her.
And you'll see me every week in Sunday school. I'll miss all of you too, you know.
The end-of-year picnic was not limited to children and their parents, but was open to anyone in the community. Augusta Harris, with whom I had lived the second year I taught, arrived bearing 2 huge pies. She settled down on the porch steps and regarded me critically. "Well, Mabel," she said, "you look a mite puny. Did you forget you are eating for 2 now?"
No, Augusta, I'm eating as much as I can. I never have been able to get down all you think I should eat.
"I've got extra eggs. I'll make you a custard," she said. "Somebody needs to look after you since your ma isn't here to do it."
I'm not sick,
I told her.
But thank you anyway. I appreciate your thoughtfulness.
I wandered over to watch the relay races and pondered on how hard it is to make changes in our lives. We hang on to the familiar as long as we can and release it with reluctance. The changes in my life this year would surely have long-range effects. Myra Grayson joined me at the edge of the playground. "Aren't you glad to see this school year end?" she asked. "It hasn't been the easiest."
No, it hasn't. And I am looking forward to a peaceful summer. But in spite of everything, I know I'll miss the children next year. When does Serena get home from school?
Next week. Daniel declares that he can't wait, but she won't be home a day before they're fussing at each other. Life will be back to normal.
It's about time,
I thought. Poor Daniel had been the brunt of much harassment from Daisy Brewer, the daughter of the ill-fated shingle mill manager. It did my heart good to hear Daniel's booming voice as he took part in the year-end activities. The children surprised me with a gift for the baby. They had embroidered their names on quilt blocks, and Amelia Matthews had put the quilt together. Even the boys had done a creditable job. Edward looked at his block with pride.
I didn't even get it all cinched up in a knot, he boasted. Ma says I can sew a button as well as she can. I'm still not much on darning socks, though.
As we locked the school door at the end of the day, I admitted to Len that it gave me an empty feeling to think I wouldn't be returning in the fall.
Your days won't be empty for long, he said with a laugh. Of course, you may still wish you were back here.
Oh no, I'd much rather be taking care of our family. These have been good years, but I'm ready to move on.
Later that week, we all went to my folks' home for my birthday dinner. It didn't seem possible that a year had passed since Thomas and Sarah had come to North Branch.
Would you like the same birthday gift from me that you had last year?
Sarah Jane asked as we rode along in the buggy. I threw my arms around her.
Oh, Sarah Jane, you mean there's another baby on the way?
She had lost a baby last summer.
That's right, about 2 months after yours. You'll be such an old hand at taking care of one that you can tell me how to do it.
We'll work together at it,
I said, and then stopped at the look on her face.
I wouldn't put it just that way in front of our folks, she said. I don't think they're ready to trust us to do anything together, even yet. They still can't quite believe that we've lived to grow up.
I know. I've tried to get Ma to let me bring Violet home with me for a few days, but she always has some excuse. She's too little to be away from us, or she'd get homesick, and you'd have to bring her back. She isn't fooling me. I know she doesn't trust me not to do something foolish.
You can hardly blame her. After all, you were 20 years old when Violet was born. Your ma hasn't quite gotten used to a new family yet.
I suppose I'd feel the same way,
I agreed.
Especially if I knew me as well as she does.
I know you as well as she does, Mabel, and I'd trust you if I were there to watch.
We both laughed, thinking again of all the scrapes we'd weathered together.
Just think,
said Sarah Jane,
how dull our lives would have been without each other.
End of chapter 1.